wow, I'm sure glad that wasn't me. Maybe we say, yeah, well, that's not going to happen to me. Those big things are out there, and this webinar today is to help remind us of the big things, but that the little things are really where the big things come from. The big things are preceded by little things, maybe a lot of little things. Here are a few of those big things that have happened throughout the year, and as we go through this today, we're taking just some excerpts from our claims throughout the last 12 months, and maybe just a little bit more, and give you an idea of the type of injuries that happen among local government employees and what to be watching out for as you're out doing your job. Because we do a wide variety of things, we'll see some wide variety of descriptions. We've kind of changed these around so people don't, so we've taken names out and maybe changed it around so we don't pull a lot of the specifics out of these claims, but just so you get an idea of what happened. Had an employee working at a community play at a theater, fell off the stage and received serious injuries, life-threatening injuries. A couple of employees walking across the street that were hit by a car, serious injuries from that. We also had another one. Employee was riding on the tailgate of a pickup truck, fell out of the truck. Person struck their head on the pavement under them, received serious injuries. Had an employee that was inspecting a building, going through a building under construction, and fell from one level to another, received serious injuries. Installing a new water pipe, and the water pipe blew free, and multiple employees were struck in this incident. Serious injuries were received from that. Also had some that may not be quite as grandiose or may seem as big and newsworthy. Had a person working to lift a patient in an EMS capacity. That the patient was heavy and received a lower back injury. That's a life-altering injury. These are the big things. These are the things that are life-altering, things that we're never going to be the same after we have this type of injury. How do we prevent those type of things? Well, we need to learn from incidents of others as well as ourselves. People who don't learn from their mistakes are bound to repeat those. We've all heard that before. We all probably believe that. But it seems that many of us, including myself, sometimes do the same thing over again and then get mad at ourselves. Why did I do something like that? A couple of things to think about. What causes accidents? Accidents are really caused. There are inputs from outside forces, there are conditions, but there are also actions that we take that can contribute to those accidents happening. Those accidents can be eliminated by preventing those causes, whether it be our actions or eliminating an unsafe condition that's out there. If we don't eliminate that cause, that accident can repeat itself over and over again. So let's pay attention to what those causes were and really get down to the root cause and say, how is it that we had this type of a serious accident? Or maybe more importantly, how is it that we can prevent, or can we look at the minor incidents, the near misses, the Band-Aids and duct tape that I always talk about? If you've been around here for a while, you've heard me talk about that. If there's a Band-Aid on somebody's finger, that means there was probably a hazard somewhere, and that hazard might still be lurking around. And could it be worse than a Band-Aid incident? If there's duct tape or electrical tape on something, that means there's a problem. There's a hazard hanging around there somewhere. Watch for those things. Let's eliminate the Band-Aids and duct tape, and then we'll eliminate those serious accidents that could happen. So as we go through, I want to talk about these incidents and that have happened throughout the last 12 months and ask you, you know, what little things preceded the pain? Was there something that we could have done to prevent these? So as we go through and talk about the type of incident descriptions, think to yourself, what is it that maybe got this person to the point where they were injured? And then we'll talk about directions to go. First, though, I just wanted to point out some statistical data. Over the past year, we've had a lot of strains. Year in, year out, strains are the driver for the total number of incidents that involve you, the workers that are out in the field. Slips and falls are a close second, followed by cuts and punctures, struck by or injured by, and some other injury causes. But sprains and strains and slips and falls are really the major drivers. What drives the costs? Well, this is kind of a change. Over previous years, slips and falls have been the major cost driver. Now, sprains and strains are right there at the same, nearly at the same dollar value, but slips and falls jumped ahead this last year as the major cost driver for workers' compensation injuries. We also had assaults, struck by, injured by, and motor vehicle accidents that happened throughout the year. So I want to go through and talk about different types of incidents that we see, and point out some of the issues that may have gone along with that. But I wanted to start out with our trench collapses. Last year was a bad year. We had multiple people buried in trenches. We had no fatalities, but we did have multiple serious injuries from people that were in trenches, that even some of the trenches were very shallow, but they apparently had not been evaluated to eliminate the possibility that a collapse could happen, and people were buried in these trenches and received serious injuries. I'm happy to report that we haven't had a trench collapse accident this year. We'll keep knocking on wood as we go along there. We hope that has something to do with us jumping up and down and making a lot of noise last year about, hey, we're having issues with trenches. Pay attention. Make sure we've got our trench boxes in place. Make sure you've got a competent person there to evaluate the possibility that a collapse happens. But up until now, so far this year, we've done okay by not having those trench collapses happen. Have there been accidents in trenches? Yes. We'll talk about a few of those in just a minute, but keep your mind on that, because trench collapses and confined spaces are two of the most common ways that you may die on the job, right along with auto accidents. Speaking of confined spaces, we did have a confined space incident here. Employee entered a vault to repair a broken chlorine feed line. Chlorine had leaked onto the floor and reacted with another chemical that was on the floor. Breathing difficulties from inhalation exposure. From my estimation and from this description, this is a near fatality. Employee got into a confined space where there was an obvious chemical hazard from the description, and had breathing difficulties. My estimation, the person was lucky to get out of that situation alive. There are a couple of basic things that we can do to prevent this type of hazard. That's ventilating the space and testing the space prior to getting in, prior to ventilation, so we know what the hazards were. Now, in this situation, if we had chlorine, our normal confined space entry meter, that 4-gas meter, is not going to tell us there's chlorine there. It may tell us, hey, there's low oxygen. If we're doing our job to test this space, we'll say there's a reason why we don't have as much oxygen in this space. We need to test further. Other thing is, we ought to look at that and say, hey, if we know that we're using chlorine in a space, we should have a meter specifically to detect that chlorine, because it is such a hazard to us, to our respiratory system. So let's use this as a fair warning to all of us out there getting into confined spaces, that this can still happen. And once again, not on my watch. We don't want any confined space accidents to happen. We want everybody to go home in one piece at the end of the shift. All right. I'm going to go through this a little quicker, just because of time's sake. I told you we would go quickly on this. As I was looking through the claims from this last 12 months, I saw a trend of a lot of incidents involving backhoes or excavators and that type of equipment. So I wanted to talk about those. They came in a couple of different types. We had multiple injuries with people getting on, getting into, getting out of a backhoe or excavator, or even trucks and all of that. And it kind of piqued my attention and said, wow, we really need to look at that type of application. How are we getting in and out of an excavator or a backhoe? Are there some issues with the equipment that might affect that? Well, that might be the case. But I think each of us, sounds silly, but we should look at the little things, simply getting in and out. We've had multiple serious incidents from that, from knees being blown out to people falling down and blowing a shoulder or hurting their back as they're getting in and out of those excavators. So I think that would be a great topic for people who do that type of work for a toolbox safety talk. How do we keep people safe around this equipment? The other type of incident that we have associated with backhoes are crushing type incidents, where people's hands are pinched in between the bucket or a piece of equipment and causing serious damage. And some of these, as I read through these, I get a real cringe. But there have been several where the hoe operator was simply not paying attention, and the bucket moved when it was unexpected, and an employee was crushed. Now, there's a couple of things that go into that. One, operator awareness, keeping their hands clear when there's an employee in the work area. The other thing is the person working in the trench, or whatever the work area is. Generally, it's in a trench. Needs to stay clear of the equipment and give that backhoe operator a little extra room. We trust those backhoe operators because they're great operators, but they can have a bad day. We can have problems with equipment. There was one or two claims where the operator slipped, or a piece of clothing caught onto a control, and the bucket did something they weren't expecting, and we had an employee injured. So use that one as a point of discussion as well. How do we keep people safe working around that type of equipment? Lifting. This is a constant issue with our sprains and strains. People lifting various items, and so as we go through, employee was lifting a manhole covered and strained his shoulder. And as you guys have heard me talk over and over again, shoulders are a real driver for our costs. As we age, our shoulders don't handle things as well as they used to, but we don't have to be older. We have a lot of young people that have shoulder injuries as well. We need to think about the type of lifting that we're doing. Anytime that we get our arms above our head, that puts us in a danger zone for a shoulder injury. We need to stand back and look at the type of lift that we're doing, size it up, and determine if is team lifting appropriate. Do we have a piece of equipment that we can use to lift this piece of equipment into the back of a truck, or whatever that lift may be? Let's sit back and take the time to evaluate it and take the proper steps. Slip, trips, and falls. Like I said, this was a kind of a dark horse that came out. It generally sits in second place behind sprains and strains. But slips and falls really jumped up on us this year, and we had a significant number of those injuries, and they were serious enough to bump this cause of injury up in the cost. So let's look at these things. It's not always snow and ice. Sometimes it's things as simple as a cord or a hose out in the shop, or maybe in the office. We've had some claims where an employee was working at their desk at a computer, and they had enough cords underneath the desk that their foot became entangled in a cord as they stood up, and they fell and received a fairly serious injury just from working at a desk. So these slips, trips, and falls are ones that we need to be aware of. A lot of times housekeeping is the most important thing. Let's clean up spills. Let's move those cords so they're contained, so we don't get our feet tangled up in that. But also, we each have to take a little bit of responsibility upon ourselves when it comes to our own footwear. I have a couple of pairs of shoes that I bought over the years that are very dangerous for slipping, and I've kind of taken those shoes out of the lineup, particularly during the winter time, and when I'm more at risk of dealing with snow and ice and other slippery things. So look at the equipment that we have on our bodies. Let's see. Caught in between, these are the ones that kind of give me the cringe factor, but hopefully that's part of what this webinar does, is make us cringe a little bit. But we've had some employees that were caught in between, crushed by thrust blocks blowing free, water pipes blowing free, like we talked, backhoes pinching hands and crushing digits. This is something that each of us needs to sit back and say, what part of our operations will put me in between really a rock and a hard place, sometimes literally. Where am I going to get pinched? Sometimes it's a vehicle, sometimes it's a forklift or backhoe, but keep ourselves out of those places when we have to work in that. Do we have procedures in place to make sure the backhoe operator has his hands free from the controls when we're in the danger zone? I'll go through that quickly because I'm about out of time. I wanted to talk about just auto claims just quickly, because this is one that we're really concerned about, because it is rising from year to year, and we're seeing a significant number of auto claims, and the majority of those are kind of dumb. They're kind of auto claims that really shouldn't happen. As we look the biggest number of auto accidents that we are having, you are having out there, is our car hitting a parked car or other object. Might be a pole, might be a pedestrian, but it seems fairly clear that this is simply improper lookout. That we're not paying attention as we're backing or driving our vehicles. And so we're running into things that just really shouldn't be run into. Now, cost is not huge on this. However, the probability that we have a really serious accident goes way up when we have the number of incidents that we're having. That pole could just as easily be a toddler or another person that we back over. So we're working on a backing safety program. As a matter of fact, we were going to do that this month for our webinar, but we're still got some work to do on that. So we'll be sharing that with you probably in the Fleet Summit that's coming up. And so think about that. Backing is a huge. It's generally first or second in the type of instance that we have are backing accidents. So think about those as well. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up right here, just because I've gone a little bit over time from what I'd planned. Doug, do we have any questions that have come in about this subject?
No questions.
Wow, it must have been so clear that everybody got it. Either that, or maybe they're asleep. Now, I appreciate everybody signing in to this webinar today, and I'd encourage you, as you get done, have a little chat amongst yourself. If there's several of you there watching the webinar, what about us? What of these applies to our operations here? And is there something that we can do to reduce this likelihood? You may work in an organization that's never had a serious accident or doesn't have a lot. That doesn't mean there isn't still potential out there. Stand back and look at the risks, whether they be a physical hazard or whether they be an action that one or all of us is taking, and be aware of that of our workplace. And everybody go out and have a safe day. Doug, anything else?
That was fantastic, Jason. Thank you so much.
I even remembered to turn the recording on halfway through.
Now you can turn it off.
I will do that. All right. Thanks, folks. Have a safe day.